Guten Tag.
And welcome to an exploration into the tumultuous history of one of Germany's most infamous terror organizations, the Red Army faction, or as it's known in German,
Die Rote Armee-Fraktion,
also known as the
Baader Meinhof
group. The Red Army faction, born in the chaotic aftermath of the 1960s, was a far-left extremist group that sought to overthrow the capitalist system and establish a communist state. With its roots deeply embedded in anti-imperialist sentiments, the RAF unleashed a wave of violence that sent shockwaves across Germany and beyond. From bank robberies to bombings, from the infamous kidnapping and murder of industrialist Hans-Martin Schleyer to the shocking hijacking of Lufthansa Flight 181, they killed a total of 34 people. A surprising figure involved in this story is none other than the later Russian President Vladimir Putin, who acted as their Russian handler in the East German intelligence agency,
Stasi.
Some of these people served long prison terms, some were killed, some committed sue, and one member was caught as late as 2024, while two are still at large, and one member completely flipping sides, becoming a neo-Nazi.
Dies ist die blutige Geschichte der Terrorgruppe Rote Armee-Fraktion mit Magnus.
But before we begin, remember to hit that subscribe button and put on all notifications and blah blah blah. The group's roots can be traced back to the 1968 student protest movement in West Germany, a period marked by social upheavals in industrialized nations. During this time, a significant number of young individuals found themselves alienated from both their parents and state institutions, since many government officials in West Germany were former Nazis. In West Germany, leftist youth expressed discontent with the post-war denazification efforts in the western half of Germany, as individuals with actual or supposed Nazi affiliations continued to hold influential positions in government and the economy. The appointment of former Nazi sympathizer
Hans Globke
as the director of the Federal Chancellery further fueled resentment. Adding to the discontent, the outlawing of the German Communist Party in 1956 angered those inclined towards this political position. The culmination of this coincided with the formation of the Grand Coalition in 1966, where the two main parties, the SPD and CDU, collaborated with former Nazi Party member
Kurt Georg Kiesinger
as chancellor. This alliance was met with horror by many on the left, that seemingly endorsed pro-NATO and pro-capitalist collusion on the part of the Social Democratic SPD, the founding of Red Army faction. Influenced by their personal experiences and socio-economic assessments, the founders of the RAF soon embraced Leninism and Maoism, identifying as Marxist-Leninist. The 1965 Watts riots in the United States played a role in shaping their approach. Against a backdrop of perceived state and police brutality, coupled with widespread opposition to the Vietnam War, the later members of RAF,
Gudrun Ensslin, Andreas Baader, Torvald Troll und Horst Söhnlein,
set fire to two department stores in Frankfurt as a Vietnam War protest, and they were arrested 2 days later. The situation escalated when
Rudi Dutschke,
a prominent spokesperson for protesting students, survived an assassination attempt by right-wing sympathizer
Josef Bachmann, Ulrike Meinhof,
accusing
Axel Springer,
influential magazine
Bild-Zeitung
of inciting the shooting, remarking,
Wenn man ein Auto anzündet, ist das eine Straftat. Wenn man Hunderte von Autos anzündet, ist das eine politische Aktion.
The four defendants charged with arson and endangering human life were initially convicted, but later temporarily paroled under a political prisoners' amnesty in June 1969. While 3 members went into hiding in France and later Italy,
Horst Söhnlein
was returned to prison after the edict was removed a short time after. Less than a month later,
Gudrun Ensslin
published an article in a West Berlin underground paper advocating for armed resistance, sparking the foundation of the Red Army faction. The newly formed group members,
Baader, Ensslin, Mahler und Meinhof,
subsequently traveled to Jordan, where they received training from the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and the PLO. Many RAF members operated through singular contacts or identified each other solely by code names. Actions were executed by specialized units known as commandos, with a quartermaster supplying trained members to carry out missions. According to a former RAF member, meetings with the KGB in Dresden included encounters with Vladimir Putin, then the KGB resident in East Germany. In other words, Putin was their KGB handler. During these sessions, RAF members discussed required weapons and handed over a shopping list to the KGB. Upon returning to West Germany, they initiated an anti-imperialistic struggle, engaging in bank robberies to raise funds and launching bomb attacks on U.S. military facilities, German police stations, and structures linked to the Axel Springer press empire. In 1970, a manifesto authored by Meinhof introduced the name RAF and featured a red star logo with a Heckler Koch MP5 submachine gun for the first time. However, following an intense manhunt,
Baader, Ensslin, Meinhof, Mainz, und Raspe
were apprehended in June 1972. After the first generation RAF members were arrested, they were held in solitary confinement at the newly constructed high-security Stammheim prison. Despite isolation, they communicated through notes given to their attorneys. To protest mistreatment, they embarked on coordinated hunger strikes, eventually facing force-feeding. Holger Mainz succumbed to self-induced starvation on November 9, 1974, leading to a public outrage that led to some improvement in their conditions by the authorities. As a response to the government treatment of the RAF members, a group splintered off after the death of Mainz, after his hunger strike in prison, calling themselves the Second June Movement. They launched the greatest terror acts in Germany since World War II, killing and injuring more than 100 people. On 11th of May, 1972, they placed 3 pipe bombs at the United States military headquarters in Frankfurt. The bombing resulted in the death of a U.S. officer and the injury of 13 other people. 6 days later, members armed 5 bombs in the Springer Publishing House in Hamburg. Only 3 of the 5 bombs exploded, but 36 people were injured in the blast. 1 week after that, the group set off a car bomb at the IDHS, or the Intelligence Data Handling Service building in Heidelberg. The bombing resulted in the deaths of 3 soldiers and the injury of 5 others. And in November 1974, the group killed Gunter von Drenkmann, the president of Germany's Superior Court of Justice. The killing occurred after a string of events that led to a failed kidnapping. But they would soon rectify this by kidnapping Peter Lorenz, the CDU candidate for mayor of Berlin, as a tactic to secure the release of several non-RAF detainees, which they were successful in doing. This included estranged member Horst Mahler, who opted not to be freed and stayed in prison as a political prisoner. Inspired by this, members seized the West German embassy in Stockholm on April 24, 1975. The group took hostages and set the building to explode, and demanded the release of several imprisoned members of the RAF. The government refused the request this time, which led to the murder of 2 of the hostages. A few of the bombs that were intended to blow up the embassy prematurely detonated, which resulted in the death of 2 of the 6 RAF affiliates. The other 4 members eventually surrendered to the authorities. In 1976, Ulrike Meinhof's lifeless body was found in her prison cell, hanging from a rope crafted from jail towels. Although officially ruled as self-inflicted, this conclusion sparked widespread controversy and numerous theories that the government were somehow involved. Amidst the ongoing trial, an attack occurred in April 1977. Federal prosecutor Siegfried Buback, along with his driver and bodyguard, were shot and killed by 2 RAF members at a red traffic light. Buback, a former Nazi member during World War II, had 2 years earlier controversially stated in an interview that persons like Baader don't deserve a fair trial. Ultimately, on April 28, 1977, the trial concluded with the conviction of the 3 remaining defendants, who all received life imprisonment. Throughout the trial, journalists were restricted to 2 days in the courtroom, prompting questions about the fairness of the proceedings. Der Spiegel raised concerns about whether this atmosphere foreshadowed the condemnation of the defendants who were allegedly responsible for the emergency measures. Not only did the primary judge had a previous affiliation with the Nazi Party, but also the federal prosecutor Heinrich Wunder, who held a senior government position in the Ministry of Defense, had a Nazi past. During a confrontation with Ulrike Meinhof, Buback threatened to confine her in a glass cage. In response, Meinhof sarcastically remarked,
Sie drohen mir also mit Eichmanns Käfig, Faschist?
While in prison, the members had several hunger strikes, and during the third hunger strike in the winter of 1974, it was reported that Muller had broken and turned state witness. The prosecution, in exchange for his immunity, shifted blame onto Baader, Meinhof, Ensslin, and Rasp. Muller was subsequently released, provided with a new identity, and relocated to the U.S., along with a compensation of 500,000 German marks, or about $900,000 in today's money. In response to the Stammheim trial, the government hastily approved several special laws. For the first time since 1945, lawyers were excluded from the trial due to allegations of inappropriate actions, including assisting in forming criminal organizations. The Minister of Justice Hans-Joachim Vogel proudly asserted that no other Western state had such comprehensive regulations to exclude defense attorneys from a trial. On the second day of the trial, Klaus Croissant Hans, Christian Strobel, and Kurt Gronwald, who had been preparing for the trial for 3 years, was expelled, and some other lawyers in the trial were arrested. The RAF was involved in several raids, taking advantage of Switzerland's loosely guarded military armories, something that would eventually lead to the German Autumn, one of the darkest periods in modern German history. During the German Autumn of 1977, Jürgen Ponto, the head of Dresdner Bank, was fatally shot during a failed kidnapping attempt on July 30th. Following these events, Hans-Martin Schleyer, the president of the German Employers Association, and a former SS officer was abducted in a violent kidnapping. The kidnappers caused a crash, resulting in the death of 3 policemen and the driver. A letter was sent to the federal government, demanding the release of 11 detainees, including those held in Stammheim. Chancellor Helmut Schmidt led a crisis committee that decided not to comply, but employed delaying tactics to give the police time to locate Schleyer. The crisis persisted, and on October 13, 1977, Lufthansa Flight 181 from Palma de Mallorca to Frankfurt was hijacked by 4 PFLP members, led by Zohoir Yosef Akachi. The hijackers demanded the release of detainees in Germany and a ransom, and during a stop in Aden, the hijackers murdered Flight Captain Jürgen Schumann for not cooperating enough. The aircraft continued to Somalia, where a high-risk rescue operation was conducted on October 18th. The Special German Forces, GSG-9, stormed the plane, killing all 4 hijackers, and the passengers were unharmed. The Stammheim Death Night. After this worldwide publicized action, the imprisoned RAF members in Stammheim reportedly committed sue during the subsequent night. Their lawyer, Ant Muller, allegedly smuggled pistols into the prison for them, and Andreas Baader and John Karl Rasp used these weapons on themselves. Irmgard Mahler attempted to do the same with a knife but survived, sustaining severe injuries, while Rasp, still alive, was transferred to the hospital, where he passed away shortly afterward. Mahler eventually recovered after receiving medical care. The incident gave rise to various conspiracy theories, suggesting that the RAF members were not responsible for their deaths, but instead was killed by German authorities. The same day, Hans-Martin Schleyer, still in captivity, was shot to death while en route to Mulhouse in France. His kidnappers declared his execution and disclosed his location, and Schleyer's body was discovered in the trunk of a green car in France. A letter received by a French newspaper stated, "After 43 days, we have ended Hans-Martin Schleyer's pitiful and corrupt existence. His death is meaningless to our pain and our rage." After this highly profiled murder, the RAF and their supporters went into hiding and only participated in minor incidences. Following German reunification in 1990, it was revealed that the East German Intelligence Service had been monitoring the RAF and had provided shelter and new identities to 10 ex-members in the 1980s. On April 20th, 1998,
Reuters
received an 8-page typewritten letter in German formally announcing the dissolution of the group. Not long after that, Horst Mahler, a founding member of the RAF, underwent a dramatic transformation, embracing neo-Nazi ideology and becoming a Holocaust denier. In 2005, Mahler was sentenced to 6 years in prison for inciting racial hatred against Jews. In 2011, the last imprisoned RAF member, Birgit Hagefeld, was granted parole and released. Authorities across Europe initiated searches for Ernst Volker Staab, Burkhard Garweg, and Daniel Eclet, spanning Spain, France, and Italy, without any luck. Until February 26, 2024, when Danielle Eclet was apprehended in Berlin. Her arrest followed an investigative TV report about the missing trio, prompting 250 tips to local police regarding their whereabouts. Klett now faces trial for her suspected involvement in various crimes. The complex legacy of the Red Army faction and their actions is undeniable, and their story is one of idealism, radicalism, and ultimately tragedy and death. Today, remnants of the Red Army faction serve as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of extremism. So let us remember the individuals caught in the crossfire, the lives forever changed by the choices of a few. Remember to subscribe and turn on all notifications so you won't miss future uploads. Don't forget to like the video. It greatly helps the channel. And I hope to see you in the next one.